Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our conversation about content and keeping up with the demand for content. Today, we're going to discuss how financial firms and their advisors can meet the demand for content with an effective content mix, and ultimately one that is going to drive engagement, client retention, lead generation, all those good things that we know can come from a good content mix. And we're going to be talking about that with a panel presentation today. I'll be starting with some of my own questions, but we hope that you will also add your questions using the console on your GoToWebinar screen. So just type those questions in as they occur to you, and I'll be posing them to the panel. As I said, I'll be starting with some of my own questions, and then we will have a couple of poll questions so that you can participate as members of the audience. So we would encourage you to watch for those opportunities to weigh in and make yourself heard. My name is Marie Swift. I'll be your MC today, and I'm the President and CEO of Impact Communications. And you will see our other panelists here on the screen. Of course, they're here live on webcam, on video chat today. But we have Chris Lamoureux from Veriday, Teresa Leno from Fresh Finance, and Scott Rogerson from UpContent. So let's get the conversation started. I'd like to start with a question for you, Scott, and I'm thinking about trends and what are some of the digital marketing trends that have had a major influence in your opinion?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that we've seen is the employees or the individuals stepping further into the spotlight, and some of the company brands actually stepping behind to support those individuals and building their own personal brands. And collectively, through those individual personal brands, the brand of the organization is defined. Whereas in the past, somebody worked at IBM, we automatically had that vision of the pinstripe suit and the wingtip shoes and the tie. Now it feels like it's much more of the opposite. We're asking more about the individual and using that information to define the brand.
Teresa, what trends are you seeing?
I totally agree with Scott in that, and that there's a shift. Also, in addition to just like written content, we're starting to see a lot more like web infomercials or podcasting, where an advisor or somebody in the financial services industry is, putting their brand out there by education or whatever other pieces. So a lot more in terms of multiple types of content being used currently.
And Chris, would you like to weigh in on this one? Trends.
Yeah, absolutely, Marie. And just to echo what my colleagues here have commented on with content and individual branding, to me that extends into the concept of digital trust. And over the last generation or so, if you think 20 years ago, do you know a guy, do you know a gal who can give me financial advice? That still exists today, but the person gets validated, the team gets validated, the brand gets validated digitally. So now you might see about 80% of actual validation happens online digital before interaction. And so certainly that trend has been happening as a secular trend. Now you advance forward with the COVID scenario, when you're more restricted, it's accelerated. And the ability of getting beyond that and achieving digital trust is a massive trend wrapped in a banner of compliance that is necessary for brand protection, for regulatory compliance, for the words that you put out in the public domain, but also how you put it out in the public domain. Think of privacy laws, data protection laws. Think of domestically here in Ontario, we've got accessibility requirements that are legislated in to be delivered in June. So lots of things that work there and lots of trends that play.
I remember, Chris, when you and I did our Swift Chat, our video interview recently, we were talking a lot about trust and how people will verify by looking you up online to see if you're interesting, likable, if you're adding value. So I think that that's what all of you are pointing towards, is that validation that you're a good resource or could be a good potential partner as a human being, as an individual, as a business professional, and not necessarily always the brand, although there is some brand identity that we would like to see in content mix. So let's move on to the next question. So this is about the impact of the trends and how the trends are impacting the financial industry. So let's start with Teresa and then go back to you, Chris, and then Scott, you can have the final word on this one. So Teresa, what's the impact of these trends?
I think one of the impacts is that, you know, in addition to the compliance issues, regulatory issues, but it's also creating a demand for timely content, stuff that is relevant today or helps advisors position themselves as solving a solution for the future. So I think it's created a demand to find multiple forms of content that is, you know, readily accessible, but also the ability to modify that content, and then also the delivery system. I'm seeing an uptick where we're getting, you know, companies that they maybe have the content strategy in mind, but they don't have the other pieces that help them get that content out and delivered. So I think it's kind of a repositioning of just the way that someone's marketing themselves.
All right, so we decided that Scott was going to go next. Impact
Yeah,
on the
sure. Happy to. Yeah, I think it ties everything together, but in my past internal audit work, where I was doing a lot of audit work for financial services organizations, when we would come to the social media element of the digital communication element, it was usually a very easy step because prohibition was the policy, right? Well, we don't do that. We don't allow our teams to have a LinkedIn profile or share on those profiles. Or if anything does get shared, it's controlled by this group and they're sharing everything on behalf of everyone. Given what this group has talked about, and I think what we've seen in reality is that prohibition policy to employee communication in mass is nearly impossible to support those teams in being successful these days. And with digital now being that increasingly important channel for not only maintaining those relationships, I think, you know, Chris, you talk a lot about sparking communication and conversation. I think that's critical, but also building new relationships and finding ways to then, as a financial services organization that has a lot of compliance and brand requirements, still building an infrastructure that allows those individual advisors to stand out from other firms of advisors, but also differentiate amongst each other. You know, every advisor from that same firm is not the same. And how do we support all of that as an organization in a compliant and truly scalable way?
Chris, I think I got the order backwards, so now you get the last word on this one. Go for it.
That is just okay, Marie. I mean, and to build off both Scott and Teresa, you know, I think that pressure, that demand to push content, turning that into conversation, clearly there, clearly important, critical for business, both to generate new leads, but to keep the conversation going with your existing clients. And then when you think about technically how you to make that all work, we're knocking down barriers both within an organization, within financial services, trying to come up with tools and techniques to make it easier for the organization to do the things that they need to do, the teams and the people. And then on the receiving side, so I mean, one of the challenges, you know, in this space that we have to try to overcome is really the ability to, you know, do this in a way that doesn't make everybody a professional content marketer, because they're not. They're advisors. They're helping you with financial advice. They need help in how to go about these things.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, now would be a really good time for our first poll question, and that is going to be, I believe, when our folks bring this up on the polling mechanism. It's around the biggest challenges that financial firms, institutions, what is your biggest challenge? Those in the audience, will you take a minute to answer this? What is your biggest challenge when it comes to content marketing? Is it compliance and supervision, creating your own custom branded content, producing enough good content with the right mix of content, or is it around syndication and leveraging through a good platform? Now, if you don't know, just take a guess. What's your best guess? We'll give you about 30 minutes, or not 30 minutes, 30 seconds to think that through. Go ahead and enter your responses. All right, and then technicians, when you feel that we have a good representation of our audience in this quick poll, if you'll go ahead and bring up the results. All right, here it is. So the #1 response is producing enough good content and the right mix of content. 68% of our audience today chose that answer. followed by compliance and supervision, but that's only 20%, so a pale second, way behind in the percentage of the people weighing in today. And then 15% for creating our own custom branded content. That doesn't seem to be so much of a challenge. And 15% around the syndication and leveraging through a good platform. So that ties in perfectly to my next question, which is around our panelists and what they think the challenges are for our audience here today. So Chris, let's go with you, and then we'll just go down the line. So it'll be Chris, Scott, and then Teresa. Chris.
Thanks, Marie. And reflecting a little bit on our enterprise clients and prospects and clients who come to us looking for solutions. And the one thing we continue to hear, and it's a bit of the words that Scott picked up on, we call it hyper-personalization. It's the ability of an individual advisor and their team to separate themselves from their fellow employee of that enterprise, somebody else who they're competing with in their unique jurisdiction, and really enabling that to happen so that they can win in the marketplace on their own and help the overall organization. And how they have to do that is they have to find ways to have different looks and feels, different sub-brands within the larger brand. And that mix of content that we just saw in the poll, what's the right mix for them? Because they're not all alike. They compete differently. One might be looking at pharmacy as a sub area, a particular geography, a particular industry. And we have to help them and help the enterprises work through that mix of both content and branding that's going to work for them in their environment.
Scott?
It was awesome to see those poll responses. I think seeing the 68% talking about mix, couldn't agree more with what we've been hearing around that. And it was also, I think, very interesting to look at some of the components of the mix in that poll, the original and the curated or syndicated, having equal challenges as well. So all of those, I think, are well related to each other. And to add on to what Chris is talking about, I think that also ties into this challenge of I, as a corporate comms or firm comms organization, maybe in the past, I was relying upon the individuals in my team to be able to go out and work within their local community. Those efforts were maybe separate from what I was doing at a firm or brand level. And now those are inextricably linked to each other, of what I'm doing at a firm level in order to support that individual brand and provide the resources. So to Chris's point, they can pick what works best for them, and that it's not just the same message that's flying over each advisor's head. And then suddenly clients are now coming in the door because your sign says the same thing that they saw, and they believe that that's correct. It's all about that individual.
Teresa?
I think from what I'm hearing too is that it's just not having enough to go around, not having enough options available, especially if, we all work in a situation where compliance has to take a look at everything. But content is also very much in tune with what the advisor is trying to put out there about their practice. Some want to be able to post news media sources. Some want to be able to take content and make it their own. And I think that presents a challenge because they don't have time to source it unless their firm's able to. And what we're hearing from the firms is it's just, they may have people on their team if it's a corporation, but they just don't have enough people to produce the demand that their advisors are asking for. And then I will lead back again to the current content is a real big thing that they want all out there. They don't want to be, posting or grabbing articles that, are old because it came out 2 months ago. They want stuff that's happening today.
Well said. Let's go to our next audience poll question. So technicians, if you'll bring that up. This question is around the greatest need that our audience has when it comes to content marketing. So let's bring that up. And audience, if you'll get ready to respond. So when it comes to your greatest need, is it an effective platform for compliance and supervision? Is it an effective platform for scaling and distribution? Is it around creating good custom or branded content, finding good third-party content to license and use, or using curated content in your content marketing mix? So 30 seconds. And technicians, when you think we have a good representation, go ahead and let's look at the results. Again, if you don't know, just take a guess. All right, and here come the results. So our #1 challenge, the greatest need is creating good custom/branded content, 69%, followed by a pale second, an effective platform for scaling and distribution, 23%, using curated content in our content marketing mix, only 20%, and then 11% each for the last two answers. One is an effective platform for compliance and supervision, and another is finding good third-party content to license. So let's tie back into our panel here. And Chris, we'll start with you, and then if the other two panelists want to just raise your hands. So Chris, how should our audience be looking at their content marketing to solve these challenges?
You know, I think the most fundamental thing for me is thinking of a content ecosystem. You know, a platform that allows you to write your own content, get your own individual voice out there and your teams, allow your parent head office, if you're affiliated in that manner, to also, you know, produce content and distribute, you know, under your banner, if you will, or through your banner as well. And then have partners being available to bring in additional content for additional needs, you know, such as Teresa and Fresh Finance and Scott with the Up Content solution for curating custom content respectively. It's having that ecosystem available as a mix, pushing it through an official compliance channel. We talked about that. I don't want to lose that thought, because if you can't get it out there real time fast, you're not going to be effective. So you want to be effective there. And then giving you the flexibility to distribute it into channel of your choice in the ways that you want to distribute it. It might be a blog on your website. It might be a component of a monthly newsletter that you release to prospects and customers. It might be a social post. So there's lots of different channels that you want to have available to you as well. And then lastly, you want a feedback loop, because you want to get a sense of what's working and what's not working so that you can make adjustments. So you need some metrics, you need some prompts, maybe you need some gamification, but you're going to have all those to compete going forward.
Scott or Teresa, either one of you want to jump in on this? How do we solve the problem? Go ahead, Teresa.
I do. I was thinking, you know, as Chris was talking about that, just about some of my past experiences and conversations. And I think it's really important that, you know, if you have a firm, that they make everything available to all advisors. And I know that sounds like a no-brainer, but, you know, I've heard of some instances where, you know, this group of advisors is given these options for marketing, and, you know, the top 10%, and this group maybe not so much, but everybody needs to have the ability to use everything that's available to the firm, for sure. And as much of it as possible. I think that's very important. So it just made me think of that as you were talking, and something to bring up is that, you know, everybody's in this together. Let's give everybody the tools that they need to be successful.
Scott, any comment?
I think part of that too, we've seen in a lot of cases where traditionally the messaging was very top down, right? That waterfalled from the initial group who had the idea, created the concept, and then the rest of the team was responsible for distributing that message, not really crafting that message on their own. And we've seen a lot of successes where those advisors who are actually having those conversations on a daily basis, discussing those challenges, have the opportunity to recommend back up as well. Not cavalier, go do whatever you want and everything's going to be fine, but have the option to have a feedback loop that doesn't take a lot of their time, where they don't have to go and fill out all these forms and ways of getting that content recommended. A very quick and easy process to help to craft that message as well. Whether, to Chris's point, it's at that individual level, that geographic level, that industry level. Many of the individuals on the team are already reading, trying to stay at the head of their industry. And how do we best capture that as a marketing and communications group, and then translate that so others can benefit, to Teresa's point, and be able to take those insights and leverage them in their own branding as well.
Now, while we're waiting for questions to come in from our audience, I do have a few more. So Let's do it this way. Teresa, if you'll address this question with your hat on from a custom content perspective, Scott with your hat on from a curated content perspective, and Chris with your hat on from a branded content perspective. Same question, different hats. So why is that important in an advisor's content marketing mix? So Teresa.
Well, I think first of all, because you want that content to have the voice of their brand and be able to have a human touch to it. And it may be, you know, with something related to, you know, at our firm, we provide this, or we understand this may be a concern to you, but the ability to humanize that content piece or relay it as part of their brand. A good example of this is we have an advisor that uses our services, and she focuses a lot on divorce and families going through divorce and the situations they face. But having a piece of content that, you know, relays that messaging or those concerns is part of the brand. And I think custom is really the only way you can do it a lot of the times.
All right, Scott.
I think to build on that, you know, we talk a lot about mix, and mix is critical, and we often have a conversation about the old-fashioned hero, hub, and hygiene content layers, right? And I think some of the areas that Teresa's talking about that have to be owned is that hero piece, the one that exactly describes what I'm all about, how I'm going to help you, how you can relate to me as a human being, having those hub pieces around the specialty areas that showcase that unique perspective. And then I think even seeing from the other poll, in a lot of cases, we get wrapped around the axle that this hygiene content, the things that help to reinforce our hero and hub pieces, also have to be original. And we have to try to keep up just from a volume perspective. And so we often work with our customers to change a bit of that thinking and having the original pieces that, as we saw in the poll and as we've all experienced, do take a lot to create. You have to have a lot of smart people to create those pieces, like Teresa's team. Those are the assets, right? That's your CapEx that you're investing in. And how do you elongate the value out of that? Utilizing third-party articles can be that OpEx part of the mix. They can help provide that initial common ground, to Chris's point. So something that we have in common. We know that we're going to get greater engagement out of sharing a third-party article, regardless of the digital channel that it's being shared in. But we also need to find that way to drive that stimulated person now back to the hero piece or the hub piece, so they're not just off in a river somewhere reading a Think Advisor article and don't remember how they got there. We also see curated articles filling the gaps, right? Those ripples. So, you know, taking Teresa's example, there may be elements around divorce that doesn't make sense for that person to craft original, but are helpful for that potential client to be always reading, so that they're reinforcing what they're hearing. It provides that, don't just take my word for it, and allows us to be consistent in what we're sharing. And they help to showcase that personality as well. When we look at that content mix, a lot of cases, those lifestyle pieces of who I am as a person outside of my craft are often best curated pieces. But we need to include those, and recent studies have shown about a third of that content should be lifestyle pieces, with the remainder being original hero content and industry content, and industry being a blend of original and curated. And so really finding a way to tie those together and help to address that 68% challenge that we saw in that poll.
You know, and Scott, you're so passionate about curated content, and you actually have a solution for that through Up Content. But this ties in nicely with one of the questions we do have from our audience. So I want to pause for a minute, Chris, before we go to you for the question that I posed, and let's answer this one from the audience. Our firm does not have a designated social media staffer. It is so hard to find centralized sources of content to curate. Ideally, it would be some source of done-for-you editable posts that can be edited and adjusted to our brand. So what say you, Scott?
I agree. I think that's exactly the way that it needs to be done. Instead of kind of pushing out, here's 8 posts around this article that we recommend that you use, or even worse, here's 1 post for the article that everyone then has to share at the same exact time. It may make sense to do that for original content. You've crafted that message for a specific reason with a specific outcome. Where curated content should fit in is providing a compliant pool of interesting articles to that end advisor that they can come into a portal, some sort of method, select what's most interesting to them, and that there's a level of trust in that advisor. They're part of your team for a reason. They have intelligence. They're not going to go crazy with what they share. Yes, you need to provide proper education and training as to what to look out for, but give them that latitude to share, at least around third-party pieces, their own perspective in that. It's only a couple sentences. That's something that many want to do. And then they can leverage the original content, again, as those assets that you as an organization are providing to that advisor to bring more clients in their door. So I love the question. I totally agree. There are ways to do that without building up a team and having to expertly craft each post. Even organizations with large teams have had trouble because we initially thought we needed to expertly craft each post for the advisors. They can write a couple sentences that have their insights in what they want to share. And the importance is having them do it consistently, seeing value from what they're doing, and then having it spread throughout the organization.
Interesting. Now, I know, Teresa, you want to jump in because I can hear you emoting.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah. No, I totally agree with what Scott's, yeah, with what Scott's saying.
Go ahead, you.
I totally agree with that, because there again, if you're taking a concept on a piece of content, custom, whatever it may be, there's always going to be, you know, what Scott offers, that those pieces are out there to help build it. And I just kind of had to smile when you were talking about the advisor can write a couple sentences or whatever. And that's true. They can post it as very interesting article. Boom. That's all. They're not commenting yay or nay. They're just saying it's interesting. And being able to post and share that, because as we know, you know, people like to look at content or find content in different ways, and it's out there. It's just having the ability to find it, distribute it, and feel comfortable with it and make it available. That's what my smile was about, was everything right on point what Scott said.
All right, so now, Chris, we'll give you the floor. So you were going to answer my question, and maybe you can wrap this all together with your branded content hat on. Why is that important in the advisor's content marketing mix? And just cover anything that just occurred to you during this last phase here.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, and that's the purpose of this webinar, right? Is to get at some of these ideas and concepts. You know what struck me a little bit, because I think most of the components have been talked about, but the recognition that there are different personality types and receivers of your content, and not all content works for all people. So finding that mix that's going to work for, you know, I think there's 6 different personality types, if I'm not mistaken, that they're going to say, wow, this is resonating with me. That's gonna be one form. And oh, this is resonating with me. I'm a different person. But also on the distribution side, you have to be comfortable with what you're distributing. You know, as a writer, and I was having this conversation with one of our marketing representatives earlier this week, you know, we also have to get in the habit, just like the advisors that we're supporting, to get into a routine that lets us communicate. And sometimes it's very difficult to put your personal message out there. You're going to rely on curated content. You're going to rely a little bit on, you know, custom content that's written on your behalf. As you get stronger and you get better at distributing your own message along with that. And I think it's just a recognition about people and trying to really turn this into a conversation that's certainly about brand, but it's about the conversation that you're trying to have in the marketplace.
Yeah, I like that, humanizing it. Let's tackle this question. And Chris, we're going to have you go first, and then Scott and Teresa, if you want to jump in, just raise your hand and I'll make room for everybody to have a voice. So this is around social creation, and most who do that social creation and posting, it's so generic. It's hard to see it being customized to our level. So this must be an advisor or one of the representatives in maybe a large financial services institution. So they mention that, and then they say another jewel would be a template that helps us distill down what we do into posts for novices. Just walk us through it. And it says here, we have a content calendar, but it does no good if you don't know how to create the content for those posts, and we have no budget to hire. So Chris, you go.
I know all about that problem. So folks, I'll give you a bit of a sense from a different context, but you know, amongst one of my few duties in my company, which is about 100 people, we try to get various members of the organization to write content. And what we have done is focus on we do have a content calendar, but what we've done is actually given them an actual template, which has kind of the different discrete component parts of what they can, write about in a way that, again, they don't have to be a digital marketing expert. So if you have a title, we want you to think about the title in this way. If there are keywords that you think are important because Google should be found by keywords, think about it that way. We give them a little bit of a lexicon about how to actually write that content, a beginning, a middle with an end, trying to build the storyline in the content piece. So, I mean, that would be a simple tip that I would provide you. The other piece that I would just add, and we might get into this a little bit later, is try to get your organization into a bit of a routine, right? Yeah, you have a content calendar, but carve out time in the calendar to write through the work week. Maybe you take Monday morning, 9 a.m. before the craziness hits. That's your writing time, because I think you'll find those habits and those routines will start to drive the outcomes you're looking for.
All right. Teresa, Scott, raise your hand. Teresa.
I would say when it comes to social media and content is that if you are currently doing a blog on your website, that should be an automated post for you, or you should be posting that. Whether it's something you're writing custom or something that you're purchasing from somewhere else, that right there gives you a social post. I tell advisors you should have, 4 blogs on your website each month, turn those into social posts. Take something from Upstream and post that as well. But having a platform that helps you to do that all in one at one time or schedule them, I think is really important so that you're not missing your presence, but just automating everything as much as you can.
Yeah, I would agree with Teresa's statement. I think in a lot of cases where we get caught up is that the work is already being done elsewhere for a different channel, and we're not translating that over to the social channel. That we're creating content just for social, and then we throw it away. And then, oh no, we got to create that email newsletter at the end of the week. And we're kind of redoing all of that effort that we already did creating that posting calendar. I was watching The Wire over again for like the 8th time last night, and there was a scene where like a little kid was boxing, and it was like, what do you think about this kid? It's like, oh, he's weak. That's not weak. That's the starting line was the quote. And I think in a lot of cases as well, we try to perfect our posting calendar every week. Every little thing needs to be perfect. And to be honest, there's a lot of people who are having a lot of success in social who are doing it quote unquote wrong, right? And they're just doing it in a habitual way. They're consistent in what they're posting. It's authentic in what is being shared. I think to Chris's point, getting others in the team, if you're posting on branded channels, to have different perspectives, because that collective is the brand. So it's not just that one person's view presented as the brand's view is critical. And so tying all that together, just start with, we wrote a blog, what's the salient point that stands out to you? Copy and paste that, there's your initial social post, right? You find a great article, copy and paste something that stands out to you, that's a great social post. If you can't do that, to Teresa's point, interesting article from author, here's the title, right? That is fine. Probably not the best, but fine. There are ways to build that from there. And once you start seeing that engagement happening, that's when you start to get the juices flowing in the team. They're seeing success. We can allocate more to this effort. And that's when things start fitting together.
I had a wise mentor once tell me, create once, use many, right? So you can slice and dice that content so many ways. Another mentor said, never let good content die. Like you can reshare stuff, you can unearth content. I bet that there's a treasure trove of content that's still relevant today. I'm often amazed when I go back and look at the writing that I did for either an industry publication or for my own blog and my own audience. It's like, wow, was I clairvoyant or is it ever the same, right? People, the human needs. I do want to talk about this. And Chris, I'm going to throw this over to you. This is from our audience. And Teresa, you kind of brought this up around content platforms that can be utilized and how they relate to the firm's website. So Chris, I know that Digital Agent by Veriday does have a solution there. So maybe you could just tackle this question.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. And the way I would turn it back would be, what you want is a all-in-one solution, right? You want a solution that has content ecosystem capabilities built into it that lets you distribute that content out into a website and is effectively your website. You want the ability to have that same capability, just as we talked about, that content not only available to your website, but available and can be dispersed through your emails, newsletter if you have one, or plugged in with that, or your social posts and your capability there. So to me, then what you want to do is enable that also in that wrapper of compliance. So rather than have a content go to a compliance rep over email and they approve it, it's all part of an integrated system that works seamlessly and efficiently to get that message out, and is also cost effective, because that's important too, right?
Yeah. Teresa, Scott, anything to add? Otherwise, I have another. Go ahead, Teresa.
I was just going to say that, Chris's system with Digital Agent 2 is that if you have the capacity that there is like a content library in there that you can access and take it and make it your own, I think is really important. For firms that, have had older blogs in the past, like you said, look at what you had, take a look at it. Can it be refreshed? Can you change a paragraph? Can you reuse it? Can you create, a different post using parts of it and then a new photo? So, I mean, it's kind of being creative. And then the other point that I thought of was, when you're posting, to choose to post things that are relevant to your industry and your client base. If you're strapped at what to post on social, don't be, commenting on an NFL game or something if it doesn't pertain to the business. That's fine too, but make it your regular posting is more about the services you offer and the problems that you solve. Don't get distracted, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Scott?
Yeah, I have one little clarification. Maybe it's splitting of hairs, but I think the all-in-one platform is critical. I would change the word platform to ecosystem. There are many kind of supposed very strong in some area, and then yes, they have that, they can check the box with something else, but it may not be as good as what you've experienced in a different, more specialized environment. And so I think the platforms that are going to be leading the charge, probably already winning, DA being one of them, is building out the ecosystem for the individual, the advisor, where it feels like it's an all-in-one platform, but it's really selecting the best of each of those challenges and fitting them together in a way that works seamlessly in the delivery. So that would be the only nuance that we've seen. We've seen many all-in-one platforms have challenges, and we've seen many all-in-one platforms change their strategy to ecosystems. The most notably, I think, being HubSpot over the last few years, that used to be very all-in-one and now has hundreds of integrations because of that realization.
So this would be perfect for you to address, Chris, because as I've gotten to know DA or Digital Agent, you are creating that ecosystem where Up Content can plug in and Fresh Finance can plug in. So talk to us a little bit about how your ecosystem approach is different from what Scott is pointing out, a platform.
Yeah, and effectively a great way to present that. I mean, a platform might be considered as just a closed ecosystem, no integration, no access. I know in our client base, our clients demand from us the ability for them to choose their tools, right, and their capabilities, and we plug into them. And that could be a CRM that they have, that could be local listings, that could be other search optimization considerations, and very certainly it would be content players like Teresa and Scott. And allow for those to be available as an add-on, an API in, something that's efficiently enabled, that's pick and choose by the enterprise, by the advisor in a standalone way, and made available with flexibility of choice. And again, we always come back to cost effective, but to me that then also gets back to allowing the advisor and their team in the enterprise do what they do best, which is give financial advice, and let software companies like mine, like content experts like Teresa and Scott, do what they do best to enable that ecosystem.
Well said. Anything else? We have more questions. Teresa?
Go on with the questions.
So this is probably something for you, Scott, to answer. It's about curated content. I'm our social media manager. However, our compliance team is hesitant to use curated content in our content mix, but using branded content only, it's a heavy lift and it's difficult for one person to scale. So what are some tips for having a conversation with compliance around providing the compliant pool of curated content that Scott mentions?
This is critical, because I think this is where something that seemingly could scale becomes another huge bottleneck and frustration for every person involved in that workflow. And so what we want to try to accomplish, again, with curated content, tying in everything that was discussed, is giving those end advisors the opportunity of choice, right? Not providing one posting calendar and saying, these are exactly everything that you need to post. We often see that great mix of being 15 content pieces made available on a weekly basis out to those advisors to select from, kind of at minimum. You don't want each one of those third-party articles to have a compliance check, just like you would with your original content pieces. And so what we work with on our customers is really two different methods. Making that an automated flow of setting up either a whitelist of publications and then looking for specific terms that you're interested in. So if I'm interested in retirement planning, I only want retirement planning articles from these publications that I trust. The other layer that we have available inside of the UP content system, which would be part of DA as well, is the ability to automate the checking of each article, the full text of those articles, against the policy that the chief compliance officer and their team has created, and giving a disposition for each article automatically, and only allowing those articles that have been approved to then be made available. It's important that it's not a generic compliance policy because of the way that those policies are approached. And it's important that it's not a generic pool of content that is now deemed compliant, because that's not going to then fit the interests and the needs of your advisor community. So there are solutions. We could talk a whole webinar about how to solve that problem, but rest assured there's a solution out there to address your challenge that's going to allow you to set those criteria up, ensure that the right hygiene of articles is being made available to your advisor group in a content library inside of a tool like DA, and that only those articles that have been approved by your specific compliance policy are then available in a way to reinforce the original content that you've already created and made available as well.
Okay.
Can I add something to that? So when we create an article, we do use third-party links inside that article to help support it. And we find that, you know, generally 2 to 3 of those links, which are third-party that support the article, we don't have an issue getting them through compliance. There again, like Scott said, we know what publications we can pull from. As a content publishing company, there's certain ones that we will use and some that we won't even consider. As long as it's unbiased information and it, you know, it's generally, like Scott said, it's easy to set up, I think, as long as the parameters are defined at the firm level of what they want, what they'll allow.
Okay, let's move on. There are a couple more questions on the console from our audience, but I'd like to bring up our last poll question before we run out of time. And I still have a few more questions myself. So technicians, will you bring up our last poll question for the audience? In the last 12 months, what content strategy produced the largest ROI, return on investment? Was it branded content posted natively without boosting, meaning you didn't pay for any advertising amplification, it was just organic? Licensed content promoted without boosting, curated content promoted with good content, and then email newsletters filled with a mix of good content, or just other? So take a guess. I'll give you about 30 seconds. And technicians, when you think we have a good representation, we'll see what our audience says. The largest ROI over the past year during COVID times. branded, licensed, curated, or email mixture. All right, how's it going there? Technicians ready to show us the poll results? Here they come. All right, so the number one answer here is the best ROI, according to our audience this year, our email newsletters filled with a good mix of content, and then distant seconds, thirds, and fourths. So 19% curated content promoted, just good content and posted without boosting. 19% also for branded content posted without any boosting. And then 14% other, I wonder what that is. Hey, audience, if you'd like to type in what other means, use the question box, if you will, and we will take a quick look there and see if we can determine what this 14% other is. And there was one last result there that the technician just took down, and I didn't memorize it in my head, but I think everybody saw it on the screen, so that's probably good enough. But while we're waiting for the audience to type in, what was that other thing, that 14% of the audience who said it was something other than what the choices were that we gave them? Let's go to this particular comment that I have around the client life cycle. So let's do Scott, Teresa, Chris on this. So if we consider the client life cycle, how do these content types that we've been talking about address the challenges of financial advisors?
So from the curated perspective, we often think about it as a barbell in that life cycle. Certainly you can use it throughout the decision stage as well, but where curated articles tend to best work is in the I don't know who the heck you are stage, and I'm here to learn more about you and see if I want to start that conversation with you. I want to learn about the lifestyle things you care about. I want to hear about what you're reading. I want to know what your perspective is on these articles that we can all access. That helps to generate that next conversation. Back to that one question, curated articles tend on average to generate twice the engagement, especially for that early group, because there's a feeling of lack of bias. It's not as big of a commitment as going and reading an original piece. But bringing that mix together will actually drive about 2x the increase in the conversions off of your original content as well by providing that context. So we see curated articles work really well there in the I don't know you phase. We also see curated articles working really well on the exact opposite side of the life cycle, which is the I know you really well and I've known you for years section, where I'm maybe not as interested in always reading your original thoughts, because those tend to be more focused on new people coming in. I already talk to you all the time. I know what you have to say. But what I want to get is that email newsletter that helps me look through your eyes and see what you've been reading. What have you been on top of? What helps me understand how quickly things are changing and what your perspective is on those things. You then are really that continued resource in a digital way outside of your Zoom calls and Teams meetings now, of how you can provide that information and then spark that next conversation of, hey, I saw this article that you shared. I was wondering how that applies to me. Let's talk and see what that can do for me. It's a great way to continue to tie those things together and allow those advisors to take a more active role in the financial future of their clients, but do it maybe without asking even more time from those clients and do it in a scalable way.
Teresa?
I agree with that wholeheartedly too. And then also the fact of, you know, situational content, I call it, or what's happening content. Obviously we're still in COVID, but getting the information out of, for example, CARES Act. So that is something that could be appealing regardless of where that potential client or that client is in the life cycle, as it pertains to their investments and maybe some changes or things that have happened. You know, being able to draw out of a retirement account without penalty, if the need arises. So there's some content that will fit regardless of where the life cycle is, and then there's some that, you know, won't there again. And I think it's having a mix is probably what is best for advisors to use. The newsletter piece, we do draft newsletters, obviously, and we try to have different pieces that pertain to different client types or so. But I think that's important, is just to have a mix because you're targeting multiple groups.
Chris?
Yeah, it's wonderful going third in this panel because how do you beat these people, right? Scott and Teresa are wonderful. It's the mix that I keep coming back to, right? And nurturing might have a different mix than when you're an existing customer and you've been with that, provider for 5 years. You're going to be thinking a bit differently in terms of that mix. You're going to be thinking about the constituent type that you're targeting in the beginning, and maybe giving them some of the consistent same material versus the tail end, where you kind of have a deeper sense of where they're at in their demographic, where they're at in their life. You know more about them, so you can maybe tailor certain things a bit differently as well. If they're coming close to their retirement, estate planning starts to matter. Buying that cottage in retirement or buying the retirement home kind of thing. So, I think to me is the mix of having that flexibility and agility, which I really is what I'm trying to achieve on behalf of our clients.
I love it. And so we've been talking about the mix for life cycle of a client, but there's a question from our audience about the mix of content as in video, blog, podcast. So let's talk about video specifically, because that's what our audience member has posed. How polished, what platform? Should it be slick and, professional? Should it be iPhone and a little bit more authentic, less produced? So Chris, let's have you go first on this one.
That's a tough one. Video is important, right? It's a form of content. It certainly has advanced over the last several years to become a very prominent form of content. All of our clients want some form of video capability. I'm less concerned about the distribution component of it, and the professionalism from my perspective. My preference, and this is again where the personality types matter, my preference personally is real and authentic. One of the things I try to coach even my team is, think about, we could take 6 months and produce this perfect video, but is it too late to the market? Let's get real and authentic in the right way. It certainly have a level of professionalism, and I would go with that personally.
All right, who wants in on this one?
I would agree with Chris. I think video, it's hard to broad brush video, because I think there's video as an asset that is kind of the more produced, keep coming back. This is helping to describe that I'm going to use a lot, for us, demo videos, overview videos. We want to spend our time on those versus just a quick screen share. Let me click a bunch of stuff. But the videos we do have a lot of benefit from are the screen share personal video that we send along that is authentic and is focused on that specific person. And only after they see that are they going to want to come and look at the highly produced video, because everybody knows what they're going to get out of the highly produced video. Something that's watered, highly produced, it's going to say all the right things, but who am I actually dealing with? And am I going to regret this decision 6 months from now? That highly produced video doesn't necessarily give me that feeling, but seeing the team, what they're doing, what they think about a specific challenge, that I think inspires that trust and those conversations that I would then want to have with that group.
I would say there's two types of videos. The first being commercial, and that's, at that level of highly produced, and that has its place. And then there's the humanizing, I want to get to know you, decide if you can help me with my problems videos. And I think that is really where advisors can shine, is in just doing recording and talking about a concept or their concerns and putting it out there. And I think that when you appeal to someone in a human way, and you're talking to their pain points, I think you probably have a better chance of having them contact you than if you're putting out something that's highly produced, especially right now. And I'm starting to see a lot more of those types of videos out on social media, for sure.
Yeah. It's amazing what you can do with a good webcam and a good iPhone. You can produce some really nice videos and maybe no production layered on, or maybe just a little bit. Like, excuse me, Chris, when we did our Swift chat, we just used GoToWebinar, and then we put a little bit of production value around it to make that 20-minute conversation come to life. So it wasn't just two talking heads for 20 minutes. We put in a template or a graphic or a call to action, but our goal was to add value throughout the entire conversation, and then have that be social content and a blog post and so forth. So since I've mentioned this a couple times during today's broadcast, I'll mention that my blog is called Best Practices in the Financial Services Industry, and you can find it at my name, marieswift.com. And do go and watch the Swift chat that I had with Chris, because we had 20 minutes of just like two old friends, although we're just getting to know each other, Chris, and talking about content and authenticity. And we just use good old fashioned webcams with a little touch of production value on the back end. And I think it's pretty presentable and it's authentic. It's just us talking, right, Chris?
Exactly. It was a wonderful experience.
All right, so we're wrapping up now. We have about 5 minutes, and I do not see any other questions from our audience. We've done our 3 poll questions, so I'm going to ask as many of my questions as I can, but we've got a couple of people saying that they had a hard stop, they had to leave, but they're thanking us, saying that panels like this are very, very helpful for them. And I think maybe people have that Zoom fatigue that we hear about, where they don't always want to be talked at or called on or be on camera, but they appreciate hearing like we were in a conference room sitting on a stage, right? So this has, to me, been a valuable conversation, and I echo what I'm seeing here from the audience. So let's see here, what's important to ask here in the last 5 minutes. I'm going to go to my question number 11 and maybe skip the ones in the middle and then go back if we have time. What questions should our audience ask themselves if they want to evaluate their content marketing? So we'll go Teresa, Scott, Chris.
I would say, first of all, what are we using? What do we have on hand? How can we get started? I think that's the best thing. Take a look at what you're already doing and then add a component of what you want to start doing. Like say that you've done a great job of blogging and newsletters, but you're not so, not actively participating in social. Make a plan for social and move forward from there. And then next, I think it would be take a look at how you're distributing the content next. That's a very important component. And then third, who can you help you to partner and bring other content pieces there? So I think it's kind of evaluating, taking a look at how you're going to distribute it, and taking a look at where you can access other content to help support what you're doing. You can't do it all at once. I say try to adopt one thing first, evaluate, and all those pieces should come into a plan for you.
Perfect. Scott.
I totally agree, and not to just restate the title of the webinar, but I think mix is an important first thing to look at and can be fairly quickly analyzed, just looking over the types of content and what buckets do they fall into, to understand where maybe you are overweight, where you're underweight, how can I do more with what I have instead of just trying to create more. Are there ways to your point, Marie, use that content piece over a longer period of time? And then I think the other important piece that sometimes is hard to think through is, where does your team fit into the strategy of the distribution side? Are they a conduit for getting your message out, or are they the creator of the message and you're providing them resources to then create the message from? It sounds like semantics, but I think it's a very critical difference in how you're approaching your content strategy and whom you have in mind as the customer of your strategy. Where we've seen the most success is that shift to the team being the customer and providing the resources to the team to develop their strategy with the guardrails and the bumpers or whatever you want to call them, rather than trying to utilize the team as a way to get your strategy out in the field.
Chris, final word?
One of the unique things about COVID is I have an 11-year-old dog, and he just started barking a second ago. So I had to put myself on mute. And hopefully he won't start barking in as you saw the male person come to the door. Where I would go is be honest with yourself about where you're at in your team as an individual in your practice, and set realistic goals, right? So just like a financial plan, they're going to be different. What one group is going to be doing is different from another. Your starting point is going to be different, as well as your end goal. And then, so to me, I would focus on building an improvement plan that measures some of the successes. And there's going to be smaller wins, to get you to the bigger wins. We all want to achieve increased assets under management as an end goal as a financial advisor. But from a content marketing standpoint, a digital marketing, you're trying to improve presence. You're trying to improve time on site. You're trying to improve people that click on an ebook and download and give you your contact information, so then you can have a whole different conversation with those people. You're looking at the mix. You're looking at maybe you're doing it all yourself, but you want to distribute that to your team. But again, so to me, it's just be honest, understand your start point, understand your goals, measure your goals, and make adjustments. And I think, 6 months from now, a year from now, you'll find yourself in a much better spot, in a different spot, and where you hopefully want to be.
Well said. Technicians, if you would bring up our final slide for today, I want to make sure that we get that up for the audience to see before they run out of time and have to go off to their next meeting, or to rescue the dog from the mailman, or versa versa. But we are offering a free consultation, and you can do that right here if you want either one or all of us to consult with you. A free consultation with Veraday, Fresh Finance, UpContact, and or Impact Communications. All of the people here today are offering some consultative services for you. You can do this by just sending an email to Chris Lamoureux at Veraday.com. And of course, follow Veraday, UpContent, Fresh Finance, Marie Swift, and Impact Communications on social media. And we hope to see you back here for another great panel presentation and conversation in the future. With that, we'll say goodbye. Thank you, panelists. You've been great.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Mike. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.